What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well, and if you didn't notice, I am in a new setting. This is just a different section of the same office you've seen me in for the last number of videos, but my couch, which was on 3 months back order, finally arrived. So now I have a new setting for private practice skills videos, and it also means that I can see my clients in person, which is super exciting. But enough about that, let's get into today's video. Today I want to talk about burnout in the therapy profession, which I have spoken about in a number of different videos on this channel before, but I believe that this video has a different take, a different angle than what I've spoken about before. In prior videos, I've spoken about more acute versions of burnout that therapists can tend to experience, such as feeling overworked, not having a sense of control over your workload, maybe experiencing forms of secondary trauma through the work that you're doing with your clients, things like that. Obviously, all of those are super important to address as well, so if that's what you're needing support with, I've linked to some of those prior videos below. But beyond these acute forms of burnout, I'm noticing more and more that therapists are experiencing burnout within the profession altogether, as in questioning whether they want to continue with clinical therapy work at all. Stating the obvious here for a second, everyone has absolute complete freedom to step away, pivot, or do whatever the heck they want with their career. But what I want to comment on is that I'm noticing a lot of therapists tend to internalize a lot of their experience around feeling like they've burned out on the profession altogether, meaning that they're feeling a lot of guilt or sometimes shame around the fact that they're feeling like this therapy profession is not for them. I mean, I've heard folks question whether they're a good therapist, whether they actually care about the clients that they work with, etc., etc., and I think there's so much more to the story than that. So in today's video, I'm going to explore some thoughts, musings, and likely some ramblings about what I think could be going on here for a lot of therapists in this position. Now, before I dive in, let me emphasize that these are just my subjective, anecdotal thoughts and reflections. I don't have any hard evidence or research to pull from in order to back up what I'm saying. So please take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt. But I think that this is a conversation worth bringing up and starting to explore, at least, even if we don't have kind of hard data to go behind it yet. All right, so enough prefacing. Let's dive into some of my thoughts about what might be going on for folks who are feeling totally burned out on the therapy profession. The primary theme behind most of my musings here is that there are some aspects of how our therapy profession is set up that don't quite make sense, seem a little bit backwards, and sometimes are straight up harmful. One thing that I think comes up for a lot of folks who are finding that they're totally burning out on the therapy profession, whether they realize this consciously or not, is that there's a realization that there's some oppression inherently built in to the therapy process and how we are taught to help the folks that we work with. Now, I have to be honest, I am by no means an expert at all on the dynamics going on behind this oppressive system. In fact, I feel like I'm just sort of an introductory learner on this, but I'm just starting to tug at that thread a little bit, and the more I tug, the more mess I'm finding behind that curtain. The whole system of therapy is built on kind of a hierarchical dynamic where there's somebody, us, the therapist, who knows a bunch of stuff. We're the experts, and we're going to help someone who doesn't know a bunch of stuff, is not the expert, and it creates a sort of power dynamic where us as the therapist holds a lot of power and the clients that we work with are quite vulnerable. Not to mention that for most people, when they're coming into therapy, they're already in a vulnerable position in general in their lives. It's a bit of that us versus them, dualistic type of thinking where I am okay, I know a bunch of stuff, you're not okay, you need my help. And we know historically over and over again that when humans are in this kind of dynamic, they wind up causing a whole bunch of problems, and often it becomes highly destructive. Now, obviously, as long as we're wearing a therapist hat and someone is coming in for our services, there's some amount of this kind of power dynamic going on, but I think it's been emphasized even more in the ways that at least I've been taught to be a therapist, to kind of hold that power, hold that frame for my client, rather than acknowledging that I'm also a human, I am capable of making mistakes, and yes, I am educated and trained and equipped to help somebody, but that all of that is coming from the imperfect packaging of my human nature. And I'm gonna just push the pause button there because I don't want to ramble too much further, but hopefully you get the idea that there may be some oppressive systems in place in our entire therapy profession that continue to be promoted to this day. I think some people who are burning out on the profession are kind of jaded by that and they want out. Another reason why I think a lot of therapists wind up burning out on the profession altogether is because, in my opinion, we have a very backwards way of approaching the trajectory of our entire career. I know this isn't universally true for every single person, but generally, on average, this seems to happen for a lot of therapists. When we first start out in graduate school, our first years of training, we tend to get handed the highest need clients. It's been 14 years since I first started my graduate school training, and as I look back on the trajectory of my therapy career thus far, since then, the highest need clients that I worked with hands down were during those first 4 years of graduate school. And so generally in our careers, therapists get handed the highest need clients early on in their careers, generally as trainees and as, newly licensed therapists. And over time, most therapists on average tend to work with fewer and fewer high needs clients. That feels quite backwards to me. There's something about this system that is set up for therapists to feel burned out, because you're kind of creating a scenario where when someone is in a beginner state, you're giving them the most challenging work and saying, here, this is your life calling. Work up your training so that you can work with folks that are likely easier and easier for you to work with as you get more and more experienced. I mean, regardless of profession, who wouldn't burn out on this kind of a model? But here we are. This is kind of the trajectory that most of us are on as therapists. And piggybacking on the same backwards doesn't make sense to me kind of thinking. Most therapists receive really low pay or no pay early on in their career, and hopefully over time your pay increases. And though, yes, generally for pretty much any career, you start at a lower level of pay, and as you get more experience, you start to get raises, you can increase your pay over time. Of course, that's naturally what happens and makes sense, but from my perspective, there is such a huge discrepancy between starting pay for therapist trainees and newly licensed therapists, community mental health therapists, which tends to be earlier career therapists, and the potential pay that can come for therapists in different career options. I mean, as I reflect back on my grad school days, I worked for free, of course, during grad school. I didn't get paid anything as a practicum student working with the highest needs clients that I have ever worked with thus far in my career. Not only was I getting paid $0, but I was paying tuition in order to get school credits for those practicum training things, which I get that money needs to go to the supervisor and all of that, but wow, I was working 20 to 40 hours a week for 4 years for free, paying my school money so that it could show up on my transcript. And then when I first finished graduate school, even working in a private practice setting as a postdoc trainee, I was making about $15 an hour, which if I wanted to, I could have skipped out on the 4 years of grad school and hundreds of thousands of dollars of tuition money, and instead 4 years earlier started working at McDonald's and I would have made so much more money. It's hard to justify this such low level of pay early on in our careers, and yes, later on you have the potential to earn more income, but at that point, folks might be in their 40s and 50s still paying down their student debt from when they were in graduate school ages ago. Again, this just doesn't make any sense to me, and so it makes sense that a lot of therapists then say, why would I keep working in this really, really low paid job when I could pivot to a non-clinical work job and make a lot more money, like sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times more money. As a related tangent, I've mentioned in some recent videos that I've been reflecting lately on how to make therapy more accessible without causing burnout in therapists or in a corrupted system. And one counterintuitive idea that, at least to me, seems to make sense is for therapists to focus on building financial wealth early on in their career, as early as possible, so that you can have the income you need to pay your bills, pay off any, school loans or whatever you might have, and invest that money, because we all know if we can invest money earlier, it's going to become so much more money later on. And once we have a financial portfolio that's really healthy, that we don't have to be living paycheck to paycheck, then we can consider how we might like to give away our time or potentially offer some of our time in certain locations for lower pay, do pro bono work, things like that, because we have the option of doing so, the privilege of doing so, because we can leverage our financial wealth that we've already built up. Feel free to poke holes in that concept if you wish. I know that this is a controversial idea and a lot of you are not going to like it. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, these are just a few kind of initial musings about what I think could be going on for a lot of therapists who are totally burning out in the profession. I think there's so many more reasons beyond just these for why someone might say, I'm not so sure the therapy profession is for me, but I wanted to get people's kind of brain juices flowing on this one because I don't really hear people talking about some of these items that I've mentioned. Above all else, the point that I'm wanting to get across in this video is that if somehow you are feeling or determining that the therapy profession is not for you, or that you're totally burned out on the entire profession, I want you to know that it's not something you did wrong. It's not your fault. It doesn't say anything about your character or your ability to be a kind, helpful, good person. It might just simply be a reflection of the messy system that we're operating within and trying to help people as we go. So if you're finding that you're totally burning out on the therapy profession as a whole, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect, and instead of saying, what is it about me that's not working here, to see, just test out, hey, is there anything going on in the system that I've been operating in that might have contributed to my experience of burnout, and at least to free yourself of any narrative that somehow you failed, you've done something wrong, etc. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs to simplify that aspect of your work life, from scheduling to notes to billing, and they have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, if you've hung around for this long in the video, I hope you found this illuminating, fruitful, then maybe just like sparking your curiosity and your interest in some of these wonderings that I have as well. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.